Great. So if I look at some of the key topics you mentioned, Bret, you talked about real-time, and Anand, you talked about personalization, and Chris, a lot of people know about Mozilla and the open source strategy and the way you pull that in. Each of these are aggressive topics that are hitting the web and really impacting the big players and the small players. But one thing that always is kind of in the back of our head is there's somebody else out there who's the big gorilla, right? Sometimes it's Google, sometimes it might look like it's Twitter, sometimes it'll be an Apple or Yahoo. So how do you handle trying to push change from kind of the challenger category?
What we did in our experience was change the rules of the game. And so we went into effectively creating a new category for a browser. The browser category was effectively dead, with Microsoft soundly defeating Netscape. And so we went in and we said, well, this new category, we think that it's important that it be about the user and about user experience. We think that performance matters. And we believe that things should be open, so open source and decentralized. And I think the fourth was, and hey, we're not Microsoft. And I think that, as a strategy, worked pretty well.
Social services tend to operate because of the network effects of closed systems, and one way to compete with incumbents in that space is to really take advantage of openness, because in the history of the internet, things that are the most open and the most free tend to win.
What is it that you guys do that you say, this is our intellectual property, don't come near it? What is it that you guys have which is under lock and key, that if someone else started to copy it, you would go after them?
I don't see patents fundamentally as something that you can really enforce in this day and age. I think it's useful to have, and you might be able to prevent the most egregious abuses, and maybe it's a deterrent for people to copy you exactly. Personally, I believe the biggest, the thing that keeps you ahead is constant innovation, and the fact that you discover what the real problems are before they do.
Well, as an organization dedicated to openness and innovation, there's not a whole lot that we would protect or go after people for stealing. And in fact, please come take our stuff. It's all open source licensed. I think the one thing that, I'll say two things. One thing that we would protect is our reputation, which is more or less embodied in our brands.
So I got a question here on Twitter, and it's something I hear a lot, which is, how do you consider yourself a success? What is that measurement that says, you know what, we've made it?
In our case, I know we've gotten there when a large number of people use Meehive as their way to consume news, and or when they want to learn about a topic, the first thing they do is go to Kosmix.com and look up that topic, and that becomes kind of the default way of doing things. So that's what I define as a success.
I think for Mozilla, we don't necessarily have an idea of what the end goal is, but we have an idea of what we want it to feel like. And so we feel we're successful if the internet feels, vibrant and fun and exciting and still feels relevant to you.
How much do you involve your users in how the product gets shaped?
I kept on thinking about the Simpsons episode where Homer gets to design a car, and it ends up with 100-ounce cup holders and costs like $200,000 by the end of it, and that is sort of the outcome if you just do everything your users say. And I think at the end of the day, your goal is to create something your users will love to use, not something not to do everything that they say.
And if you remember that Simpsons episode, Bart, his son, loved the car and went back to his dad at the very end and said, I thought your car was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's important. So we got two more questions before we head off to the Q&A. So I want to ask one question. You guys have done other companies. You've worked at other places. You've had varying levels of success. How much do you learn from the past, and how much do you say, you know what, it's a whole new ball game doing what I'm doing? How much do you leverage the past, or how much do you look at the situation changing?
It's a blessing and a curse, I think, because it's a blessing because in many cases you know the obvious wrong things to avoid. And you sort of learn some important lessons along the way. For example, one of the most important lessons I learned about startups, both as a founder and as an investor, having seen many startups blow up as well as succeed, is the importance of founder chemistry, the chemistry between founders, and how that is very often the most underrated risk factor in a startup, both by investors and by founders.
I actually worry that I'm becoming too experienced sometimes, because that's why I'm such a big supporter of things like Y Combinator, because I think there's a great quote. I actually still have never been able to find out who said it. I think it was a venture capitalist, but he was going up to like one of his firms, who was failing to a competitor, and he said, "Why were they able to do this thing and you were not able to do it?" He said, "Well, they were too naive to know it couldn't be done." And I think that's true of so many really disruptive technologies, as they're like done by people who aren't jaded by experience, and they really try to do truly amazing and ambitious things. And that level of naive ambition, I think, is something that like people undervalue. I think people value experience a little too much in the grand scheme of things.
If you have a ton of experience and you are going to go compete in a startup like culture, like the trick is to try to trick yourself into thinking about always swing for the fences, don't be afraid to fail, make many small bets, and then double down on anything that works. And that sort of formula, just trying lots of stuff and not being afraid that a lot of them are going to die, but something might stick. And if it does, then double down on it and then keep going and investing and iterating. And I think that's real, at least for me in my experience, that's been part of the magic. And that there are so many people that are just afraid to make any bets. And it's a real shame. So if you have ideas, don't be afraid of them.